Yo, 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 what's up, everybody? We are back. It's Meaning Making 101. I'm Chris,
I'm DJ.
and today we are continuing our journey following John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis lecture series. This episode is on the religion of no religion.
Bum, bum,
What does
bum.
that mean? We're about to find out. And I forgot my notes from last week. I left my notebook at home. So DJ here is going to help us recap our previous episode, and then we're going to jump on in. I'm going to get us live over on the Book of Many Faces over here. If I can get this notepad working as a mouse pad. Here we go, here we go.
All the little things that we gotta do.
Part
Where's
of the
the
game.
AI to do all this for us, man? I want to know.
We're going live. What's up, Facebook fam? We are in the house. It's actually a podcast in our special series, Meaning Making 101, covering John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. This episode is on the religion of no religion. What does that mean? It's not anti-religious. We'll give you a little hint right there off the top.
Well, it's like the difference between nothing and no thing, like
There you go.
nothingness and no thingness.
That's a good point. It is. It is. And we'll find out what Vervaeke actually means by this term here today. So welcome all. So happy to have you here with us. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the things around if you want
While
to.
he's doing that, I'm going to go over
recap.
the notes. So at the top of last episode, we were introduced to a schema, which was higher states of consciousness, empowering gnosis, and then working with counteractive dynamical systems within a wisdom framework. And if we have this, and particularly one that can be scientifically articulated, we'll have a reliable response that ameliorates and alleviates the issues of these perennial problems. So, for lack of a better term, enlightenment. So, this is what he's trying to deal with, what he calls enlightenment. How can this be undermined? Well, it can be undermined by a lack of welcoming worldview. So not you don't want a wisdom tradition that's just doom and gloom and death and everything. It's not going to go anywhere. So this worldview that we're developing needs to be a welcoming worldview for everybody to be able to participate in. An ecology of psychotechnology for addressing perennial problems is necessary, but not necessarily the be-all, end-all. We need more. We need to we need integration with historical forces, interactions between and look at the interactions between the historical forces and perennial problems, and the misattunement thereof. So a religion that is not a religion. We need something that facilitates what religion facilitates, that is not necessarily a religion of dogma and proclamation. So the historical forces have led to a loss of the three orders, which create perennial problems. And the three orders are the pneumological, which is our coherence and connectedness; the normative, which is our depth of significance, through like self transcendence; narrative order, which is our purpose and direction, a narrative like a story. And the loss of these three orders is gnawing at us, not just individually, but as a whole, as societies, societies interacting with societies and at a special level. We talked a little bit about Woolf and her book Meaning of Life and Why It Matters. And what she was saying was meaning in life is about a kind of deep connectedness. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to connect a subjective attraction to objective attractiveness. Excuse me. So subjective attraction is, like what, draws you in, what works for you. And we want to connect that to something that's objectively like, oh yes, this should work for everything outside of my subjective experience. But because of the nomological and normative orders, there really is no objective stance that you can take. Those two orders are inherently subjective, because you experience the coherence and connectedness. You experience the significance, the depth of significance. So that's automatically subjective. And he briefly talked about her talking about how we can bullshit ourselves, and one way is getting others that agree with us, and we can bullshit ourselves into thinking that something is objective because you have enough people agreeing. It's whatever the fallacy is. I forget what it's called, but it is known. Of course, it's that way. It's known. Everybody knows it's that way. Which seems a little silly on the surface, but like how much of our just commonplace understanding of what's true in the world is just because it's known.
Many other people say it's true. We still want to be a part of something greater than ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's one of the problems that we run into perennially.
And particularly with like proclamation type faith systems. And I'm not saying necessarily faith systems themselves that have proclamation inherent, or I don't want to say inherent, but yeah, it's us. Yet again, proclamation is just a proclaiming, I believe this.
We're stating contentions of belief. And I believe that what Vervaeke is pointing out, and what Christ and the Buddha and people like Socrates and so forth exemplified, was a way of being, an orientation or a posture to life that you take on. And in this case, we're talking about agape, like we were in the last episode, and unconditionality, like unconditional love for all of life, like that a parent has for their baby, that we would imagine God having for us.
Which is actually inherently subjective as well, because you are expressing that feeling, that engaging with it as well. And so, like, what are we to think about what Wolf is saying? Do we really need things to be objectively valuable?
That's right, because the solution in the agapic way of being is something that is transjective. So it's beyond our subjective sense, and it's beyond an objective measurement.
Yeah. And so what we should be looking to, what are the set of characteristics that need to exist in order for meaning to be created? And that's the trend, these characteristics are beyond the subjective or objective. These are conditions that we need, or that need to exist in order to make meaning.
And this puts us in a co-creative dance, if you will, with life. So you're loving all of life regardless, and you're loving the co-creative dance that we are making with it.
So
we don't need anything to be subjective or objective. We inherently just take on a loving posture.
We don't necessarily need that objective attractedness. It's like,
I think this is what Jesus was trying to point to.
So, what is RR again? Relevance realization. There we go. Relevance realization is inherently self-interested, and by that is realization is constitutive of its own being, that being relevance realization, and it's self-organizing and creative.
And the point of relevance realization machinery, you could say, in our brain, the capacity for this is inherently to gather more relevance and more realization. So it's inherently self-interested, like a self-interested process.
So we need to be connected to those conditions, like deeply connected to those conditions that afford relevance realization itself.
Because the more that we realize, the more we find that is relevant, and it turns up our relevance realization capacity. And so it's this constant reciprocal building and building and building with our environments.
Yeah. So one must also care about these conditions, and these conditions are universal, as in like everywhere there are these, everywhere in every culture there are these same conditions that make meaning making possible. They may be expressed a little bit differently, particularly in the narrative end of things. The stories are different, but what they're pointing to is the same. When we care, we are engaging in agape, loving the process of meaning making and making persons. Truly being a person, making persons. And if it's only just making a person out of yourself, that's still enough, right? Agape is the cure to Wolf's insight and argument Like we don't need objective.
It is.
We don't necessarily need that in order to grow.
That's
in
right.
order to understand.
It is the solution to the subjective objective dilemma. We don't need for things to be objectively attractive for us in order to relate with them and co-create with reality.
So they talked about the need of
Just gotta love.
the cultivation of agape. So by this it means the deepest appreciation and caring that is constitutive to the realization that makes the agent arena relationship possible. So this caring is a necessity for the realization of what makes meaning making, or no, not meaning making, excuse me, it makes the agent arena relationship possible.
And what gives us meaning in life and helps us be meaning makers in the world.
So on historical forces, so we can use 4E cognitive psychology and the understanding of the theoretical machinery to address the historical factors. There's a man, Francisco Varela, not Varela, but Varela, in the deep connectedness hypothesis. He had a book, I believe it's his. My notes are a little bad, so forgive me if I'm wrong. But the psychology of awakening. I believe that's what, awakening.
That sounds right.
So, what are the insights of third gen 4E psychology and unpacking the 4Es, and how do the 4Es of third gen cogsci address the three orders? And Vervaeke was saying that Varela was finding himself saying things that resonated with the philosophy of Dharma and Eastern, like Buddhism and stuff like that.
And the three orders that we're referring to are the nomological, the normative,
And the
narrative.
Yes, and Varela will actually use his own ease, if you will. So we have embeddedment. So the quote here, which is Varela, mind is not programmed software or rule bound representation of symbols. Instead, the mind arises immediate coping with the world.
Arises from
Yes,
immediate coping
from
with the
that,
world.
there we
Yeah.
go. From the immediate
From or
coping.
through, one of those two.
Yeah. So dealing with the problems at hand in the relationship to the world at large. This is what we got, we're doing. And that is, fittedness within the agent arena relationship is dealing with these problems directly at hand. So the other three E's of cogsci, so the first one is embeddedment, the second one first one's embodiment, the second one's embeddedment, third is inactive, and fourth is extended. So if we're talking about embodiment, your cognition is grounded in your relevance realization, which is grounded in a bioeconomy, and there are constraints within the bioeconomy how your brain realizes relevance and your cognition, and it's embodied within the body of biochemistry. It first starts with the primary needs of this machine holding us around.
That's right.
Allowing us to move around.
We constrain, so our cognition constrains information coming in constantly so that we can better fit ourselves to the environment.
Cognition is embedded in biology. Continual niche construction. We're continually constructing niches.
This is getting into some of the new realizations in the philosophy of biology.
Yeah. So by continual niche construction, you can look at it like this: like the organism shapes the environment, which then shapes the organism. And we do this in culture, but we do it with massive results.
That's right. And not just in long-term evolution and in culture are we constantly doing this process of gaining increased fittedness. We're doing this individually within ourselves all the time through our relevance realization capacity.
That is our basically what our consciousness is doing at any given time. It's trying to carve out a niche and then respond to how the environment responds to its carving out of the niche and then carves its own niche
Yep.
within the body.
Yep.
So the mind and the body and the world are in a deep continuity with each other.
Yeah, every moment, every time I shift to get comfortable, my body is doing relevance realization. Oh, this is a little bit better posture. This feels more comfortable. It's constantly reframing and re-seeing and reacclimating itself to reality.
So one of that looks like vanilla.
Ice,
Vanilla.
ice, baby.
Yeah, right.
Dum, dum, dum.
One of his is emergence. The mind emerges out of the embedded brain to a living environment through complexification. So our environment, and then complexification helps us realize what is relevant more. So I guess complexification is inherent in relevance, or environment complexification, excuse me, is inherent in relevance realization. So there's a reintroduction to a vertical axis that isn't a two-world vertical axis at this point. Biology and evolution are self-organizing and self-making and self-identifying and self-optimizing. So I am a self-optimizing thing seeking the conditions to project and promote my agency. That's the self-identifying part of this biology.
That's what our relevance
And
realization is
evolution.
doing for us. It's helping us to self-optimize.
And then it becomes reflective upon itself too. Not too reflective.
And that's what we mean by relevance realization being inherently interested in itself, because it's just further driving up the power of that relevance realization machinery that we have in our cognition.
So I have Varela's 4 E's: embodiment, emergence, and emotion. So now we're talking about the emotion. And the idea that there's a divide between emotion and reason. But if you lack emotion, you are incapacitated as a cognitive agent, because emotion prevents the combinatorial explosion of not knowing what is most relevant at the time. Like the whole story of a fire in your house.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Your
That's right.
birth certificate isn't that relative most of
Yeah.
the time, but if there's a fire in your house, you might want to get it.
There's always so much information around us that we could be taking in, just trillions and trillions of bytes of information at all times. That's where the term combinatorial explosion comes from. The combination of different things that you could do in any given situation is so much that it's just explosive and it's beyond our capacity. So our cognition narrows and utilizes emotion to be able to recognize what's important to me in this moment.
It makes obvious the agent entering a relationship and what's involved
Right.
with
So
that.
in the case of a fire, how, and neuroscientists and psychologists, everyone involved in all the different fields of cog-sci have been trying to figure out for so long, how does our brain realize what's relevant? What is this relevance realization machinery? How does it do it? Because how does it chain together something like birth certificate, pet, kids, computer? Like how are these things actually related? Well, if you care about your home and you care about your pets and your children, and your computer is probably important, or your phone or whatever it is, and maybe important documents, all of these things are going to rise up in the same grouping in your mind at once. Like, oh, I got to get all these things, and that's how they're connected together by our emotion.
Yep. So we
So you
need
need emotion.
something. Well, we need something analogous to emotion,
In programming AI.
Yes.
If we're
and
trying
also
to
understanding how it works within
ourselves,
us as well, because sometimes emotion isn't the best thing, but emotion is one of those things that you can't really measure. It's like happy. Well, how happy? What kind of happy?
Yeah, it's all subjective.
Yeah,
we have
way
hormones. We're
too-
growing
so-
biological beings that know we're going to die
so-
one day. So how do you program that into a computer? And is that even a good idea for us to try? Who knows? That's up for debate.
So
But that's definitely the next, what would you call it? The next vista or horizon for AI to be exploring is we figured out how to get the AI to be able to be attentive and focus and narrow in its attention to some degree. But we don't know how to make it recognize what is actually relevant without it having emotions like we do.
So religio has in it caring
Experience of higher states of consciousness that help us achieve and realize self-transcendence.
So yeah, religio has caring and coping, and that is at the core of our cognitive agency. So you could say religio is coordinated attachments between individuals to make persons, right? So we get on to Varela's fourth E, which is excellence.
That's right.
And so we talked about positive psychology, like which studies happiness and meaning of life and wisdom, but also it's a way of doing psychology that sees how things build up and excel beyond the norm, opposed to standard psychology, which is looking at how the mind breaks down. So it'd be wise to study those that are beyond the norm, which are wise.
Those that excel. That's right.
Which are wise people, and we need the wisdom to know how to best use this science that we're developing as well. So you got to build a wisdom framework around this science as you're building the science.
Yeah, because
as well.
With our current tech, we have the power of quote unquote gods without the wisdom of gods.
And so hopefully we can, with this, rescue two of the three orders, which the ones we're rescuing would be normative and nomological, because it's not necessarily the narrative that we're rescuing, because narrative isn't necessarily the same everywhere else, even though it's pointing to the same thing. And so with the science and what we're looking at, we can get two. And
yeah, we'll have to see what he tells us about narrative as we go on.
Yeah, I think he's saving it.
He made some great points in the last episode about it.
So there's a woman, last name Good Enough, who's talking about a transcendence. So there's this idea of the standard idea of transcendence would be a transcendence above. But really what she was talking about was transcendence into the sacred depths of nature.
We should be doing both.
Yeah, which will change the fundamental grammar of what we think of as transcendence.
I like that.
So when it comes
because creation is all around us and everything around us, not just above, but it's in all of creation.
So on the narrative order, points to a cosmic telos, which telos is not open-ended. It's not an open-ended thing. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end.
And we need an open-ended telos.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So we need.
And this is actually getting into the narrative a little bit now, right?
Yeah. This is in the narrative. Let's see. The problem. Okay, I find it.
We need to be able to create open-ended stories and open-ended myths.
Because transcendence is open-ended.
That's right. Well, let's say it this way: the absolute, the divine, so the alpha, the omega, is this endless, infinite thing that can never be totally comprehended. God is beyond all knowing in all of time.
Nor is the process of transcendence a thing that you can get to.
That's right. There's no capped enlightenment of it. There's no capped enlightenment. There's infinite room that creation has given us through which to grow into.
So perhaps we should think of the narrative order as gnosis, an open-ended optimization.
There you go. I like that.
So the stories are not independent existing things. They may be different from culture to culture, but they're all...
And they're deep, deep teaching tools. They're not just something that we're supposed to take literally and then argue over the literalism of them. That's the trap that religion got into when it was trying to challenge scientific materialism as the scientific revolution began, and it started to say, oh, the world is actually this old, not what it says in your book. And then religious leaders were like, well, actually, we're going to start taking everything literally now and say this is what it is. So religion became proclamations of belief for us rather than a way of being. And that should be, I believe, the top focus. The highest focus is embodying that orientation to life.
How do we optimize ourselves to the best way of being? And particularly,
we need our myths to be open-ended.
This is my opinion, particularly in a way that doesn't disregard base human natures as well. Because I think that was the problem with those who came out of the Enlightenment with the idea that if we just did the right things, we could free humans of their nature. And that led to a lot of like really nasty experiments on humans on massive levels.
And genocide, hundreds of millions of deaths in the 20th century.
Thinking some people are better than other, eugenics, like a bunch of stuff. So this last little bit I have here, is it possible to move to a post-narrative? And by post-narrative, he means concerned with the depths. So post-narrative, concerned with the depths of things.
So let's let these stories continually grow as we grow.
Way of being. So is it possible to move to a post-narrative way of being? We need to go beyond narrative. And he's supposing that higher states of consciousness and this feeling of deep at oneness might be the way to go for this, instead of a set narrative, an ongoing narrative.
And there's nothing wrong with the narratives. We're just not saying this. We're just saying that the story is ongoing, and that it's a dance right now that we get to take part in, that we are continually writing.
Yeah, precisely. The stories are ongoing, even if there's a beginning, a middle, and the end, because you can read the same story many times and get different insights.
They apply to us in different ages of history. We're continually returning to challenges we've experienced previously in human history, and they're in different contexts. So there's always going to be new information and wisdom to gain.
Yeah, and so he's the last little bit here is like a flow of constant exaptation from fluency into insight, into flow, into a mystical experience, into a transformative experience, into a higher state of consciousness. Ongoing, and that's like the flow chart of the solution to the narrative order issue we have. And because this whole episode is
that might be the solution to all three.
Well, that is the solution to all three. Yeah, definitely. But that's the ongoing story.
The ongoing story is,
and then
the ongoing
when
optimization.
we come out of the higher stage of consciousness, we have a greater fluency, which gives us greater insight and greater flow. And thus reinforcing the other, because these three orders are all self-enforcing as well. They don't exist by themselves. They reflect and
that's right. So we have to get these stories back in conversation with our communities, with ourselves, and with each other.
Yeah. So that was last week's episode.
It was such a good episode.
It was a lot too.
And you brought up the two-world mythology at one point. So
so we have a vertical axis of understanding now with
the two-world mythology is the idea that we're down here, and then the divine and heaven is all up there.
Yeah, but instead we can have that axis, but now it's us moving and transcending through the axis, and not in a way of leaving this world and moving on to the next, but continuously adjusting and optimizing our fittedness into this world as we come to a greater understanding of
as
it.
we even transcend. Yes.
Yeah.
So it's just one great thing. We're not separating anything in our new configuration and our new understanding of reality. Because that breaking apart and separating has caused us a lot of turmoil. There's a lot of competing over which version is right. But if it's an ongoing mythology that we're all writing and realizing together, that changes the orientation entirely.
I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday or something like that. We're just talking about religion and other things like that. And, I said something and it came to mind. But the idea of heaven as a stopping point, end point scares me just as much as the idea of hell, frankly. Because the idea of, you just get to this place and
only some people get there,
and all you get to do is just watch people that are alive and see who comes up next, and it's just like, man,
the idea of burning in everlasting hell never seemed fair for someone that chose the wrong religion or made some mistakes.
But I find both. I find both just as terrifying.
Yeah, and I just don't see like a merciful God being somebody that would punish people eternally. And I think that the idea of eternal punishment in the Bible is just trying to say a really long time, or it's going to feel like a really long time, because you're out of space and time at this point.
There's some interpretations of what hell is.
So we could relive our mistakes.
Most of what we think of as hell in the modern era is because of Dante's Inferno.
Right, that too,
But there's other interpretations of hell that I can agree with, which is the willful separation from the source, from God.
Absolutely.
But I don't think will last forever, because if you willfully cut it all off, well, how are you going to get back to it? You've willfully cut yourself off.
But you can't, because it's all one thing. You
Yeah,
know?
but you can, go into a different state of
If you see it that way.
existence that isn't a continuation. It's just something that rots down and gets reused into something else, and that's hell.
I would think there's always
Well,
a way back. I don't think
what's the worst?
the ultimate mercy, the
Well,
ultimate
you
embodiment of mercy
can't
wouldn't.
rescue something that doesn't want to be rescued.
Yeah, but once you die, you're not a person anymore. You're not a human
Well,
body anymore. You're a soul, which is
We
a
know
fragment.
neither whether we are or we're not.
You're a soul, which is a fragment of
And
the
I'm
whole.
not saying hell comes only when you're dead.
Yeah, well, of course, I agree with you there. I think that it's what we can make of our own lives, in this
'Cause-
planet.
But what's the worst punishment you can give to a kid?
But anyways, I don't, and I disagree with that kind of literalistic take from the Bible of I don't believe that's what they're trying to convey there. I think that what is being conveyed is that it could feel very well like an eternity, but of course, the infinite, merciful love of creation will always invite you back home once you've learned what you need to learn. Your soul is literally just a fragment of the whole, and it's never totally separated. It can't be. It's always been the ultimate.
Lucifer willingly separated himself from God.
Yeah, and that again is like a teaching tool for us, and I think it could be an aspect of reality as well. But
the greatest love you can have for your child is to sacrifice them to their own choices.
Sure,
unfortunately,
sure.
As
but eternity is
because I do
eternity
believe in
is
free
the
will.
ultimate level of overkill, which I think is it's also childish to
Well,
think that
I could quit.
it's a teaching tool that's going to tell people it's so bad to do this that you absolutely do not want to. So you give them the connotation of eternal suffering, but really eternal burning of your skin off.
No, that's
without it
Dante's
ever going-
Inferno. Like yet again, it's mixing a bad. I think Dante's Inferno is absolute garbage as far as the understanding of
And
the nature
somebody
of
correct me then,
human
but there's
suffering.
scripture in the Bible that points to eternal burning and suffering. in hell.
It depends on who's your translation. Which translation. As I'm going through, I'm realizing the
We
translations
will have
are
to
totally
study ourselves.
freaking different.
But let's jump to another subject before we jump into the episode real fast, because there was something that you said also when we were referring to Buddha, and I remembered a quote from Buddha: "Compassion leads to wisdom, not wisdom to compassion." And we could often think that it would be the other way around. It would be that wisdom leads us to compassion, but no, it's actually compassionate understanding is what widens our awareness, widens our consideration. When we're willing to put ourselves in other shoes and see from other points of view, we are literally widening our total awareness. So that is how compassion, understanding, unconditionality, willing to see everything without an immediate judgment can lead us to more further understanding and thus wisdom.
Yep. Well, yeah. Yeah, you don't have to be overly smart to be compassionate.
No, you
You don't have to be overly capable to have compassion. You don't have to be, some guy who sits up on a hill and prays under or meditates under a waterfall for 30 years to be compassionate. You know, it's that little simple thing that resides in all of us that we can nurture, that we can then gain wisdom.
And you're right that we definitely don't have to be the Buddhist monks studying for 30 years in the cave, or we don't also have to be super intelligent to become wise. It doesn't matter what your intellect level is, anybody can become wise. And I believe that wisdom is more important than intelligence, because intelligence without the wisdom to wield it is incredibly dangerous.
And intelligence without compassion, well, we've got a lot of examples of that.
Yeah, we do.
A lot of scientists. Oh, yeah, interesting little fact. Did you know surgeons tend to the field of surgery has more psychopaths than any other field?
Whoa.
Yeah, because you give people a chance to cut other people open. It kind of draws a certain type,
And it not disturb them, like they're fine with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and enjoy it. Which,
And enjoy it.
I do enjoy breaking down animal carcasses into their constituent parts to be eaten, but I draw my line at like human. Like if I have to, I will. Like it's like if your leg's gotta go because like you got acid on it or something because like the alien came after you and got acid blood on you. Yeah, I'd chop off your leg real quick.
Okay,
but
you wouldn't eat it though.
No, it's already ruined by the acid. I don't know. I'm on the.
I thought that's where you were going.
I'm on the fence about cannibalism. If it's bad enough and you're already dead, maybe. But you ain't got no fat on you, so I don't want none of that.
Fair.
If I die in
Fair.
if I get in a plane crash over like Alaska or something, I hope I got some big old fatties on my plane. I'll make a skin suit out of you.
Ugh. Oh God.
The dark thoughts. Uh,
Yeah.
the humorous, humor is a way we deal with horror, and I see a lot of horror in the world, and
Oh
I
yeah,
won't
and
say it
it's
drives my dark
celebrated.
humor,
It's
but it definitely complements
It's one
it
of the
like
most
salt and butter.
popular kinds of entertainment. People are proud to be into like the most freakish, just shock style horror movies. I like a good psychological
I
thriller,
don't like the gore stuff. That
but
stuff's
the
just
excess
gross.
of gore, like House of a
No,
Thousand Corpses stuff, is like when I saw that movie the first time, I was like, I can't believe people get so turned on by this. And I was watching it also disturbed, like this can't be good for society. This cannot be good for us to celebrate
it's
this guy.
basically legalized snuff films where people don't actually die, but it's
No.
as close to a snuff film as you can get.
And it's also a lot of eye for an eye stuff. This guy did something bad that was very cruel and
Well, you notice
torturous and insane.
the
So I'm going to do something cruel and torturous and insane to get him back. But if you're thinking that cruel and torturous and insane is wrong in the first place, then why are you going to reciprocate it?
oh,
and
because it
just-
feels good,
yeah, we're so dumb.
you poked
We
out
need
my
wisdom.
eye, so I'm gonna poke out your eye and your family's eyes, and then I'm gonna
Then
sew
all-
them
then we're all
together into a
blind.
big body.
Yeah.
And
Brilliant. Yeah, that's going to make the world better.
next
for
movie is gonna be Human Spider.
for the little ones and the people that come after us.
Yeah, I'm not down with like the super gore stuff. I like Silence of the Lambs and that end of thing, and like Alfred Hitchcock and stuff that gets you like
Genuinely psychologically scary stuff still.
because
Yeah,
your
I'm
imagination is
down.
way scarier than seeing guts spilled out. I
Right.
just think that's
It's
gross.
funny because when I was a kid, I was like, I thought that guts and bombs, you know, going off and all that was like, I was so excited by violence. And I guess that makes sense when you're an adolescent. You know, it's priming you to be ready to be
Yeah.
or to be a hunter. And that's definitely deep in our DNA. So I can get that. But, I certainly grew out of it. It's kind of funny how that happens. And you hear the stories of the old warriors that are done fighting, but they're happy to guide the younger warriors. All right, fam, let's jump on. This is going to be episode 39 of John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. We're getting into a deep one now. This is the religion of no religion. Here we go. Hope you all ready for this. Bing.
Welcome back to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. So last time I was making a proposal to you of how we could address the perennial problems, and I gave you a systematic set of things that could be cultivated in an integrated fashion for addressing perennial problems, and then we saw how that is interacts with our attempts to ameliorate and alleviate the perennial problems interact with the historical forces, and that we get the fundamental undermining of meaning in life, and that problem set by Wolff. And then I proposed to you that there was a response to that in terms of the notion of agape. And then I moved into the direct addressing of the historical forces, looking about for recovery of something like what the three orders did for us. And then I proposed to you that if we took a look at 4E cognitive science, third generation cog sci, and in particular some of the insights afforded from that by insights afforded by 4E cognitive science, third generation cog sci, that were pointed out by Varela in his article. We can see ways in which we can get a worldview that strongly situates our meaning-making processes within it, legitimates it. We talked about how we can recover something like the nomological order and the normative order, and how perhaps we can move to something post-narrative, an open-ended optimization that is seeking for a depth of realization rather than a historical combination. And I propose to you bringing with it the notion that good enough, bringing with that whole project of responding to the historical forces and trying to bring with it a new notion from Goodenough's work on transcendence into rather than transcendence above or beyond, and how that is resonant and consonant with the picture that we've been working on together. A couple things remain that are central. One, of course, is to give an account, a cognitive scientific account of wisdom, because of the wisdom framing that is needed for both the cultivation of the responses to the meaning crisis and the use of, interpretation of, grasping the significance of the cognitive scientific framework. So we need to develop an account of wisdom together. And I also said we need to talk about this notion of getting something that's a religion that's not a religion, and what might that look like. So I want to address the second point first, because I have less to say about it, not because it's not important. I have less to say about it because it's very tentative, and I want to try and talk about it in ultimately a suggestive fashion. I'm not trying to found a movement or anything ridiculous or pretentious like that. There are many people, though, who are writing books about this idea. I recommend to you John Carse's book, The Religious Case Against Belief, which I've already recommended. There's Unger's book on future religion. There's books like Religion for Atheists, in which people are, I think, and I mean this in a serious sense, but they're trying to play with what would this might look like, a religion that's not a religion, and how can it help us to address it. Even people like Richard Dawkins are trying to propose, that we should cultivate an ability, ultimately poetic ability, to engender wonder and awe that is consonant with the scientific worldview. So a lot of people are trying to get some conceptual vocabulary and theoretical grammar going for this. So I do not see myself as offering anything definitive or authoritative, but on the basis of what we have done together, I'd like to try and offer some suggestions of what this would look like. So remember, why are we setting this problem? Well, we for many of us, right, and the group that I self-identify as the nuns, having no religion, nevertheless, a large majority of those people are still spiritually hungry in important ways. Returning to organized religion is not a viable option, and part of that has to do with a lot of the history that we've traced out. And pursuing pseudo-religious political ideologies and utopic visions is also not viable, precisely because of the trauma of the 20th century and parts of the 21st century, and the clash of the pseudo-religious ideologies and the way they drench the world with blood and torture and horror. And so I propose to you that nevertheless we need to do something like what religion used to do. We need a comprehensive set of psychotechnologies that are set within communities of practices that allow for the comprehensive transformations of consciousness, cognition, character, and culture in a way that is analogous to religion. That is what we're looking for, something that can do all of that. Because that is what we need. That kind of transformation is needed today to address what Thomas Bjorkman calls the meta-crisis of all the various crises that we are facing and that are interacting with each other in what looks to be an increasingly accelerating fashion and having an increasingly deleterious effect on us individually and collectively. So that is part of the problem. And what would it look like, the religion that is not a religion? Again, as I said, there are many people who are taking a stab at this or trying to get a grip on this. And so I am just seeing myself as contributing to, hopefully to that, helpfully to that dialogue. So part of it, I think, is, and this is of course what I tried to do, is to acknowledge the centrality of religio, and that there is there's an important role for indispensable mythos in the activation, accentuation, acceleration, appreciation of religio. And so I think that is something that should be acknowledged as what we would be looking for. And this brings out an important contrast I want to discuss. Sorry, not equal. Religio versus credo. So let's talk about this a little bit and try and get clearer about it, because we have this idea of an open-ended mythos analogous to the transgressive mythology of the Gnostics. So credo, of course, means I believe. And it's the word behind things like the Nicene Creed or the Apostolic Creed. A notion of credo is a notion of sort of a paradigmatic set of propositions that state what the essence of a religion is in terms of the truth content that is supposed to be believed. And so what has happened to some degree in various ways, and I've tried to show you this, is as this, of course, is linked to propositional knowing, and as propositional knowing has come into ascendance, right, and as the having mode has come into ascendance, the having of propositions that are asserted, right, and of course willful assertion. We've seen as all of this has come into ascension, right, this has tended to become dominant. So as I've mentioned, we often think about religions or speak of them as if they are belief systems of beliefs, right? And so you have propositional knowing, you have the having of those propositions, and the way you have them is ultimately to assert them in some fashion. Usually in a willful fashion, where I mean that very broadly in the way that we've discussed here, where it is not something that is ultimately derived from reason, but it is something that is being asserted, nevertheless. Now, I think there's an important role for credo, and so I want to make a distinction between credo and this creedal, right, assertion, creedal dominance. Okay, so let's talk about this set of things as creedal dominance. Right. But let's talk about perhaps a way of understanding the functionality of this. Okay. Now, first of all, I'm of course aware of the postmodern critique, and I will have a final, towards the final end of the series, I'll come back and talk about postmodernism. But I'm aware of the postmodern critique and that a lot of this is, and that makes sense given creedal dominance, that this is meshed with power, with dominance, with control, with creating sort of purity codes where we have boundaries of identity of the us and the other. All of that, I think, I think is a legitimate form of argument and something I take seriously. But I would put that under creedal dominance, and I would want to try and take out of what remains, what function can we see for people doing this, and how might we understand it? Well, first of all, like I said, we can think of people having paradigmatic statements and pictures that this might be a function of indispensability to them, right? So they can understand it, right, as we can understand it as indispensable mythos. Again, it's highly plausible that there is a mythos for you or for groups of people that is indispensable given the contextual sensitivity, the dynamic coupling of religio, that there's a sets of symbols and stories and celebrations and shows and souvenirs and all the things associated with mythos, right, that are indispensable for getting the kind of sacredness out of religio that people want and need in response to, for example, the perennial problems. So again, this of course is part of the philosophical reason, not just, there's also an independent moral reason, but this is part of my philosophical reason why I try to be deeply respectful to religious creeds, precisely because even though I think all of these criticisms, or all the criticisms associated with this, criticisms that I've added to in this series, I think they're all legitimate. I think this is also a very legitimate thing. Now, of course, the problem is to confuse indispensability with metaphysical necessity, and to confuse need with authority, and we've talked about all of that. What I think we can think this is not only an indispensability that's idiosyncratic to people or the group, we can also talk about an indispensable functionality that might be more universal in nature. And this has to do with a basic idea from all of information processing, from what's called signal detection theory. So signal detection theory is a theory that basically argues that we're always facing perennial problems when, and I mean that to allude to the perennial problems that I've talked about here. Whenever we're doing information processing, there's aspects in which the information is, and this is no contradiction, there's simultaneously too much information, but there's often inadequate information, like you're not seeing all of my body right now, right? So the information is simultaneously overwhelming and partial. The information is often ambiguous. It's unclear if that information is the information you need, or you're being misled in some way by information that's similar but not in the relevant way to the information you're looking for. So all of these things point to an important general conclusion. Now I'm going to have to use two terms here. I'm going to use the word signal, and this means information I want. Information I want or need. And then noise. Noise does not mean audible distortion. Audible distortion is one kind of it. What this means is, this means information I do not want. Right? It's in some way distracting, right? It's in some way misleading, etc. So, here's the idea. Here's the population of events that constitute signal that you're looking for. And the idea is there's always a significant overlap with noise. Again, where noise doesn't mean audible distortion, it means any information that you don't want that it can be confused with, look at confused with, can be confused with signal. So let's take a prototypical example. Right. A prototypical example is this. You're a gazelle, and you hear a noise in the bush. Now, that could be important signal. It could be information that you want because it's information telling you that a leopard is near. Or the noise in the bush could be noise in this technical sense. It could just be the rustling of the leaves caused by the wind. And that is, and this is the important term here, that's irrelevant to you. That's irrelevant to you. That might be signal for somebody else or something else, but for you as the gazelle, it's irrelevant. See, being signal and noise, of course, is a matter of relevance realization. So you're sort of caught here, right? Because if you're the gazelle, what you're experiencing is this zone right here, right? This zone of overlap between the signal and the noise. You don't know what it is. Now, what you can say is, well, what I'll do is I'll get more information. And there's a sense in which that helps, but you have to also understand that there's a diminishing return here. Because any new information that I try to get to resolve this will also suffer from this problem. Right? And this, of course, goes again towards you can't ultimately get certainty, etc., etc. Okay? Also, the more I regress and try to get signal about my signal, about my signal, about my signal, the more time I'm taking, and often time is an important constraint. So first of all, you can't ever escape this problem, and as you try to reduce it, you have to put in a lot of time and effort that can ultimately be too costly for you. So the idea is there's a sense in which every act, even an act of perception, is to some degree risky. It's a gamble. And this is part, again, and we talked about this, Tim Lillicrap, Blake Richards, and I, in the paper on relevance realization. This is part, again, of the issue of, trading off between various contingencies. What's the trade-off here? Well, the trade-off is I have to set the criterion. So the criterion is basically, what I do is I put a dividing line, a decision line. Remember, decide ultimately means to cut. And I'm going to include everything, right, to the left as signal and exclude everything to the right. Now, what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is, of course, I'm now opening myself up to different kinds of errors. Okay, so one of the things I can do here is if I set my criterion too high, for example, I will treat a lot of noise as signal. Okay. If I set my criterion way down here, I don't want to ever be wrong. I'm going to set my criterion really low, right? Like here, right? I'm going to set that way I'll never, the problem is if I set my criterion so I exclude all possible noise, I'm going to miss a lot of valuable signal. Okay. The other issue that comes up, so where do you set the criterion? Well, there isn't an algorithm for that. Because part of the problem is those different kinds of errors are differentially relevant to you depending on the context. Let's go back to the gazelle. You have two gazelles. You have Bill, the happy gazelle, and what Bill wants to do is basically, right, wants to avoid leopards. Right? So Bill says, well, I'm going to set my criterion very high because that way, most of the time I'm going to treat the noise as a leopard in the bush, and that way my chances of missing a leopard are very small. Now, the problem with Bill is he's kind of, he runs away a lot. There's every wind, and he runs away, and all the other gazelles laugh at Bill. Look at Bill, he's running around again. And if Bill does this too much, of course, it's exhausting, right? Now, in contrast to Bill the gazelle, there is, let's call it Tom. And Tom is the really epistemically oriented gazelle. Tom will only act on the basis of what Tom truly believes. And so Tom is going to be very skeptical, and set their criterion very low. And Tom says, I'm only going to believe what I'm really confident in and certain of, right? And that way, this is what's going to happen. So what happens for Tom is all the instances where the wind is blowing and Bill runs away, Tom laughs at Bill. Aha, aha, silly Bill. The problem is Tom is missing signal by setting his criterion so low. And one of these times, there's a noise in the bush, Bill runs, Tom begins to laugh, and as he's mid-laugh, there is a leopard on his back, sinking its jaws in a death grip on his neck. Because you see, in this context, not in all contexts, but in this context, missing signal is much worse than mistaking noise for signal. See, there's two kinds of errors. I can miss signal. I can mistake noise for signal. When I do this, right, that's Bill, everybody laughs at me. That's a cost, and I'm using a lot of energy. But if I miss, right, if I miss the leopard, I'm dead. And that's much, much worse. So that's why most gazelles are like Bill rather than like Tom. They set the criterion way over here. They're willing to make a lot of mistakes so that they do not make very many misses. Now, there's other situations where where it'll be reversed, where a mistake is much more costly to you than a miss. And so what you need, right, what you need is you need to be flexibly setting your criterion in a way that is deeply contextually sensitive, deeply situationally aware. This is again why perspectival knowing is so crucial. Perspectival knowing is your situational awareness, and your situational awareness should be, right, your primary guide to what is the context and how do I set the criterion in this context. In fact, there's a neuroscientist, cognitive scientist, Lau, who argues that one of the functions of consciousness is exactly to set the criterion for perception. So what you're paying attention to, right, is how you're situationally aware, and so how you're paying attention, how you're situationally aware, how you're setting the criterion is actually the job of consciousness. Now, as you may realize, and myself and Richard Wu and Anderson Todd argued, this again is another argument that one of the main functions of consciousness is to do relevance realization within perspectival knowing. Yet another converging argument. Now, the point about this is two things, and both of them have to be remembered. What does this have to do with credo? Well, I would argue that what credo is credo is setting the criterion on religio. What it's trying to do is determine what behaviors, what things are putting me really into contact with religio, and then what is malfunctional, what is mad, etc. Now, the issue is we have to set the criterion. That's inescapable. And one way to do this is to do it in an absolutist way. One way to do this is to say there is a final way, a final place, an absolute place to set the criterion. I think you can see from the argument given here why that is a perilous thing to do. You can see again why the open-endedness of relevance realization undermines the attempt to absolutely set the criterion. So you have to set the criterion, but it is dangerous to set the criterion in an absolute fashion. So if we can acknowledge this, we can acknowledge that we will set the criterion with our mythos, but, and that's one half of credo, but we should not ever try to set the criterion in an absolute or final manner, which is what happens in creedal dominance, because that is ultimately to misunderstand the functionality of setting the criterion. The point is not to set the criterion conclusively. The point is to continually reset the criterion optimally. Again, open-ended relevance realization rather than a final solution. So a way of thinking about that is the religion of that's not a religion would always, always have credo in the service of religio. Now, I'm sure that there are many religious people that say, well, that is what we do in practice, and we have our creeds, but they're constantly being historically interpreted, right? And I think that's sort of right in practice, but there's often been a lot of conflict between de facto and de jure in the history of the religious discussions around orthodoxy and creed, etc. And I point to you again to the work of Arthur Versluis and his work on the way in which the West's history of pursuing and persecuting heretics, people who, right, do not set the criterion as we do, has actually helped to foreshadow and train the West for totalitarian regimes and totalitarian ideologies. So I point you again to his historical argument for how that came about. So for that reason, we should always be thinking of making credo clearly and comprehensively always in the service of religio. That would be helped, as you can, I think, see, by being linked to a notion of sacredness as being grounded in an inexhaustible, open-ended optimization rather than in some absolute state of perfection.
Ooh, that was long.
So we have to optimize sacredness, our sense of the sacred. Wow. That was already 30 minutes, and that flew by. And that's a lot of notes.
All right. Why study this problem, the religion of no religion problem?
No, it's because we need to develop an account of wisdom to solve for and help ameliorate the meaning crisis we find ourselves in.
Well,
so we want to consider what a religion of no religion would encompass.
Yeah, and, we got to look into the problem of religion because many may not see it as viable, particularly because of all the trauma of the 20th and 21st century, and or even the trauma of, like, if you've heard the term recovering Catholic. I'm a recovering Catholic. Okay, so returning back to traditional religion might not be viable for some, so we have to figure out.
Yeah, for many, because we have an increasing number of the nuns, and that's not N-U-N-S nuns. That's the I don't believe in anything. The N-O-N-E-S nuns. No religion.
We need a comprehensive set of psychotechnology that are set within communities of practices that allow for comprehensive transformation of consciousness.
Absolutely, because we still need what religion used to do for us, which helped us cultivate a sense of wisdom and awe,
and an individual's grounding within, let's say, a familiarity group that can help you, like, a community of people.
The communitas.
Because that's one thing that religion is really good at doing is building a sense of community between people. And we've definitely lost that. We have 1.5 million different communities right now. There's different communities on the Facebook, different communities within the YouTubes, different communities, the gamer community, this community, that
We've
community,
even
but
lost
we
it
don't actually have
in
any
modern philosophy.
Yeah.
Because philosophy means the communal love of wisdom. So it's the love of wisdom, philosophia, love of wisdom, but philo is the type of love that is a relationship, friendship kind of love. So it's one that's done in a communal fashion. This is so enriching for our cultures. So we do need something for the spiritually hungry, because we find so many people saying, "Well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual." So people are still obviously still leaning towards, there's got to be something. I just got to find a way that relates to me in these modern times. And now we're going to consider why organized religion no longer is the option that's going to cover all the bases for everybody on this planet. Nor are our pseudo religions, our ideologies like Marxism, a solution
Yeah.
for what's happening in our modern age. So we need a comprehensive set of psychotechnologies to help transform our character and our culture in a way that is analogous to what religion used to do for us.
So religio versus credo. So we're talking about credo. What does that mean? It's I believe. It's a perspective, or it's a propositional knowing in the having mode, and is willful assertion.
Yes,
And
of what should be believed as far as this or that religion is
so it's not
concerned.
necessarily from reason. It's from just pure assertion.
It's willful assertion, and it's definitely coming from that having mode orientation rather than the being mode. It's absolutely propositional type of knowing. And we're seeing this willful assertion of belief take on religion becoming super dominant in our world today. And not just in religions, but in all kinds of ideologies, this party, that party, so on and so forth.
and so that creedal dominance. You could
Yes, it's not derived from reason, but it's asserted nonetheless.
yeah, you could like see that. It's like like how say you're an activist for whatever cause that's, and I'm not talking about the high level ones that know the literature or are in deep. I'm talking about your normal street poster holder. They just say things.
The bandwagon jumpers.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the creed has this dominance, and it has a functionality to it.
It's all about power, dominance, control, us versus the other.
Yeah, but there is a certain amount of control that does serve a function. I won't say the function is good or bad.
There is a
but there's
functionality
function.
aspect to credo that we should separate from the credo dominance mode of propositional knowing and willful assertion, because whatever region we have for taking part in religio, which is ritualistic, endeavoring towards a sense of the sacred. The reasons for it must be compelling, and that's why people got so stuck on that propositional assertion mode. Is because, of course, we're looking for compelling reasons to get people in touch with the religio, but today we're going to need something that is a little bit more open-ended.
Yeah. What was the term? Indispensability mythos.
Yes.
So to a certain extent, credo is indispensable. It allows us to have like our celebrations and our souvenirs and our things that like your celebration is a time to get together to get with people and celebrate. But then you have your souvenirs and things that are what do you call them? That are symbols, that are tools in order to get you into a mindset to keep track of information that would be too much for your brain. But we shouldn't be confused with the metaphysical necessity, the need for this, the necessity we have for something that's beyond just this.
For religio, for a relationship with what is beyond us and what encompasses and unites all of us. So we do need compelling reasons for religio, for taking part in this kind of spiritual work.
And
so
to a certain extent, there are certain things that I don't want to necessarily say it this way, but I can't say it any other way, that we do need to make, or we need to, it is indispensable, the proclaiming things is indispensable for us in certain circumstances. Actually, for the most part, we need to be able to, say, okay, well, I think this and believe this and really mull this over and do that. I guess the problem comes when you just stop. Accept baby Jesus into your heart.
When you get absolutist over it, and it's closing off any further conversation or consideration. We gotta keep the conversation open ended. We got to be able to invite everybody into the conversation, and never think that we've gotten to the end of our understanding as a species. I mean, we're always going to be learning more and gaining further wisdom, even about the ancient texts and the ancient myths that already exist.
So we went to signal detection theory, which is, we're always facing these perennial problems.
Yeah,
You
these
know,
recurring problems.
There's either too much info. Well, actually, it's both. There's too much info. Like, you know, like if you're looking at me right now, I've got a shirt. It's got a certain quality of texture. We're sitting in certain type of chairs. The lighting's a
All
certain way. All
facts.
this.
Yeah.
There's just way too much. But then also the other end, like what he said, you know, from the waist down, there's not enough information. So at the same time, there's too much and not enough. And it's ambiguous, which is too much and which
That's
is
right.
not enough.
It's often both. Signal detection theory, we're always facing these recurrent problems. There's often both overwhelming or ambiguous or not enough information. So either you got too much information or you've got not enough or ambiguous information. Signal is, of course, the info that I want or that I need, but the noise is info that I don't necessarily need or want that could be distracting or misleading. So he gives us this great gazelle example. There's a noise in a bush. It could be an important signal, or it could just be the wind rustling in the leaves, and which of course would be irrelevant. So the signal to noise is a matter of our relevance realization. Once again,
Yeah, and there's always an overlap. There's always an overlap between signal and noise. And in
Yes.
the case of the gazelle, it's that rustle could be the wind or a small critter, or it could be the leopard.
and you don't know that zone of overlap is I don't know
And
yet.
then there's the cost of, you know, like, well, if you're running at the wind all the time,
You're
wasting
using up all your
energy.
bioeconomy. Yeah,
And also any new info you get will suffer from this problem. Is it noise info or is it
Right.
signal info?
so we need a way to narrow in on what's relevant.
And the more you
because-
regress into, like, take the time to really figure out whether it's signal or noise, the more time it takes, or
Right.
the more energy
Right.
it takes. So there's a
Exactly.
cost
Yes,
to it as well.
Yes, there's the time cost to figure
It's a risky. Just perceiving is a risky game.
That's right. Every act, even the act of perception, is always a gamble.
So the trade off that we have between signal and noise is setting the criteria. So what he calls the decision line is this line that cuts between. So if you set the line too high, like too much into the noise end of things, you're just getting way too much noise, and it's, you know, not useful. If you set it too low, you lose signal.
You lose.
So where to set
You
the
lose
line?
signal.
And
Yeah,
there
and
is
you
no-
lose new information.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, where do you set the line? And there's no algorithm for setting line. There's no perfect little equation that you can, you know, put to know exactly whether it's the leopard or, you know, the breeze.
That's right.
So he continues this. It's like, so if Gazelle 1 Bill sets the line too high, he's always fleeing and running away, wasting
Yeah,
energy.
it's letting too much noise in. Every time he hears a rustle of the leaves, he's
freaks out,
freaking out.
and then, you know, and then Tom over here is just laughing at him, and Gazelle Tom sets his line too low, and it's just like, it's just the wind.
He
Every time,
only acts
that's
on what
just the
he
wind.
truly believes and already knows. So his noise
Until he
input is
hears the
low.
growl.
He misses. So he misses signals that could be important by setting his criterion too low. He laughs at the noise and enter the leopard that's biting him.
Then eats him, and he does, and
eating
then
him,
he's got the signal now that there's a leopard, but unfortunately it's too
Right,
late.
it's too late.
It's
Yeah,
attached
you're
to
right.
him.
So there's two errors: missing signal and mistaking signal for noise.
Yeah.
Now, most gazelles have their criterion high, just like deer do. You know,
Because
they'll move at the slightest thing.
in this circumstance, missing signal is worse than having too much signal.
So we need to be flexible in how we set
Yeah.
criterion. This is why perspectival rather than propositional knowing is so important. Perspectival knowing is our situational awareness.
Yeah. You know, we need to set it in a way that is deeply contextually sensitive. And this is what your consciousness does through
Constantly
perspective.
narrowing in and then
Expanding
zooming
out.
back and then
Well,
narrowing in.
and one thing is if you're sitting there and there is no breeze and you hear that,
Oh boy,
now you have two different signals
That's
because you
right.
have no
That
breeze,
confirm.
and
likelihood of
your
a predator.
consciousness says, "Oh, but there's no breeze tonight. What is that?"
That's good. That's a great example. So we need to be flexible in how we set our criterion. And Lau stated that one of the functions of consciousness is to set the criterion for our awareness, to be able to do relevance realization within our perspectival knowing.
Yeah.
So credo is setting the criterion on religio
Yeah.
to determine what puts us in contact with the religious experience and what isn't putting us in contact.
Yeah, and he went over two, and I'm going to just do it real quick, but
This is a
two
great part.
two ways to do this, right? There's an absolute final place to set the criterion.
That's right.
And that's very perilous and ridiculous, and it's a bad way to do it. And
That's the
how you-
absolutist,
that's how you get-
totalitarian. Yeah.
yeah, the most awful things we've seen are coming from that.
Yes.
The second way, which is the better way, is to continuously set the criterion optimally. So as you're going, and not the most or the least, but the optimal for any given point in time that you're at. So yet again, very perspectival. From your perspective, what you're going through, you need to be able to set this line to be able to sift it out as you're going.
Yeah. Because when we get too absolutist, you get things like what happened during the Holy Wars or manifest destiny and things like this.
Yeah.
There's this super absolutist belief that's happening. That's this proclamation, and you're excusing all kinds of horrors
Yeah, or
in order to get the job done.
There is no God except for the revolutions.
Right. Yeah. There you
Yeah.
go. Dangerous to set our credos in an absolutist fashion. This is why that changing of the narrative order into a transjective orientation to life and an open-ended narrative story is so important. This is what the religion that is not a religion is attempting to do. And this is just the very beginning groundwork, laying the first bricks to a new cathedral that may take 200, 500 years to build. But we're beginning right now. So we're going to acknowledge the centrality of the religious experience, of religio. And we're going to look for open-ended mythos that is transgressive. So we've looked at the functionality of credo. And let me move on here because I'm going to look on the wrong page. We can set the criterion with mythos, but not in a final, absolutist, conclusive way. We want to keep it in that constant optimization. That's what I was looking for.
Very much like the gazelle, oh, it's not windy today.
Yes.
What is that?
Yes. Thus, the religion that is not a religion would always have credo in service of religio. So Arthur verse Lewis wrote a book, The New Inquisitions, that they showed on the screen, and warning us about heretics, basically, and how heretics and the old Inquisitions basically trained the West for totalitarian regimes and ideology. Sure. That's why we're in the mess we're in.
Yeah.
Talk about breaking it down, though, man, because now we're getting into solving for the postmodern critique, some of which have some relevant points, but the solutions that we've been offered so far by postmodernism is just more like Marxism, and it's not working.
And maybe they're not necessarily solutions;
itself.
They're just proclamations.
They're sometimes they're good points that they're proclaiming. That's right, but we're not getting into our being mode, into a perspectival orientation in a way that we can actually approach solving these things. So we got to get to postmodernism or metamodernism, and that's really the stage
or
that
just get
humankind is in right now.
Get rid of the word modern, because modern architecture sucks. And I mean modern period architecture. That stuff sucks. Modern art sucks. The postmodernism, after the modernism sucks. Let's just
that's why we got to cover all term for them all now.
The transjective, let's call it the instead of the postmodern or the
you might come up with a new term. Go.
Well, that was just like
because right now all we have is metamodernism or postmodernism.
Yeah.
That's the two terms. I'm glad that we've gotten to postmodernism. A lot of people aren't aware of that. It happened like 15, 20 years ago.
Transjectivism.
Yeah, right.
Put an ism at the end of it and you'll ruin it.
I know it. Yeah.
Ists and isms, two of the worst, the nastiest suffixes we have in the English language.
Often. Well, we get too convinced that they're the one and only thing. Yeah. The one and only way. And it's not, all the different ways, Buddhism, Christianity, so on and so forth, are all, like I've said this so many times on this podcast, are all just various cultures, various humans' ways of attempting a relationship with the infinite. Mm-hmm. With the divine, with that which is beyond us. And of course, being what we are in the midst of our evolution, we walking, talking primates, we're going to fail at that constantly. But we're going to continually be able to get better and better and better as we optimize. And thank God for Mr. John Vervaeke and aiding us in this time, man. I think this guy is one of the heroes of our time, and I'm not one to jump looking for heroes by any means, but I was looking for the people that are the helpers, you could say. You know how Mom always says, when you see tragedy and strife, look for the helpers.
So we're at 3011, and that will segue us into the three levels of mythos.
Right on. Let's go. All right, guys, we're jumping back into this episode of Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. If you guys are enjoying the show, make sure to like and subscribe us here on Actuali, and go over to John Vervaeke's page. We got links on in our summary here. Go ahead and give Vervaeke some love as well, because he's got a lot going on that follows this series, such as his After Socrates series and many examples of actual circling dialogos style conversations, which is a new form, or not a new, but a resurfacing and a reviving of an old way of communal conversation that humankind has largely forgotten about. But it's an incredible tool that we have at hand to be able to engage our distributed cognition, our collective intelligence, get it all working together. All right, fam.
You're at a good spot, right?
Yeah, I think I'm good where we're at. So here we are, guys, jumping back in.
Next, I think that the religion that's not a religion should, when it's crafting its mythos and understanding that Credo is always in the service of religio, it should always understand the mythos as being beholden to sort of the three levels that we've been talking about here. So you have the unconscious level, right? This is the level at which relevance realization is taking place. Right? Most of the relevance realization that's going on for me, I do not have introspective access to in any way. And this, of course, is the grounding of my participatory knowing. Of course, you can become conscious of your participation, but that's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying that the processes from which I emerge as an autobiographical ego, and the world emerges as an unfolding arena, right, are ultimately below the level of consciousness, and that's where the participatory knowing is happening. And then, of course, there is the level of consciousness, and this is the level of salience landscaping. And, of course, this is the level of perspectival knowing. The perspectival knowing is grounded in the participatory. And the perspectival knowing, with the situational awareness that I've just talked about, of course, makes possible the procedural knowing. These are tightly intermeshed as well. This is where I am, right, consciously directing my interactions in order to appropriate affordances given to me at this level, and I'm appropriating those affordances by cultivating skills so that my coping turns into skillful interaction. My coping caring becomes skillful action and apt sensibility. And then, of course, this passes into the cultural level. This is the level of distributed cognition. And this is the level at which we are trying to, right, communicate. So this is the level at which connections are being made. This is the level at which connections are being sensed and internalized. And then this is the level at which connections are being shared. And so what we have here, of course, is the whole machinery of mythos and, of course, the machinery of science and other things such as that. But I'm going to, although that's at the cultural level, I'm taking it out because what I want to concentrate on here is addressing this. So, as I said, this will pick up on our propositional knowing, but of course the mythos also points down towards, right, all of these. Because here we have credo in the service of religio. And so any mythos is going to understand itself this way, if I put it horizontally, as always in the service of religio, which means it is always going to also be directed, if you'll allow me, downwards, right, to the procedural knowing, the perspectival knowing, and the participatory knowing. So it should be a mythos that is explicitly committed to both of those in an integrated fashion, that the credo, the paradigmatic propositions, the paradigmatic pictures, right, are always in the service of religio, and that the mythos, therefore, is directed towards accessing, activating, accentuating, right, appreciating the procedural knowing, the perspectival knowing, the participatory knowing. So it should be, given the argument, this is very tentative here. What it should be doing is once you've got this programmatic framework in mind, then what it should be doing is cultivating an ecology, right, of psychotechnologies. An ecology that it is designed to be both top-down, it reaches from the propositional down to the participatory, but also is open to and allows bottom-up emergence from the participatory up through the perspectival, through the procedural, and into the propositional. So I've tried to indicate to you what that ecology should look like. You should be setting up psychotechnologies, sets of practices and cognitive styles that have complementary relationships to each other, that have sets of corresponding checks and balances, strengths and weaknesses, so that you have a dynamical system that is reliably complexifying in a reliably self-correcting manner. Which means we need to do something very important. And this is an idea that emerged in a discussion with Jordan Hall, and he put it this way, I think, which is a very interesting way of putting it. We need a meta psychotechnology that is designed to move us out of the intuitive construction of psychotechnologies into the more explicit, so 2 points here, the more explicit creation of psychotechnologies, and explicitly the task of trying to cultivate an ecology of more explicitly engineered psychotechnologies. So this would be the meta-psychotechnology. So this religion that is not a religion should give people ways of cultivating this meta-psychotechnology as a way of crafting the ecology of practices for addressing the perennial problems in a way that is always consonant with and coherent with worldview attunement. I think that there are deep connections between the capacity for collectively creating the metas, and you have to do this collectively, because that's how psychotechnologies are created, right? The capacity for creating this collectively and the individual virtue, meta-virtue, because that's what it is, the meta-virtue of wisdom. There's deep connections for that. The more the people are individually cultivating because wisdom is basically a way of cultivating and coordinating the individual virtues. We'll come back to that. So you need individual wisdom, the meta virtue, in order to collectively, right, pursue the creation and the ongoing cultivation of the meta psychotechnology that will allow us to engineer individual psychotechnologies and to cultivate a ecology of psychotech that reaches, right, comprehensively down to our participatory knowing and affords comprehensively the emergence up from our participatory knowing. So I think those are some very general structural features. Some things we might be wanting to do at a more organizational level is, and this is extremely tentative, extremely. So what might it be to create that open-ended credo? Well, we have something like that already because of the emergence of the cyber technologies that are being increasingly integrated with the psychotechnologies. And I'm using this just as an analogy, but we have something like Wikipedia. And what's interesting about the Wikipedia is the way it's generated, the way it's maintained, the way it's revised. It's done in this collective, cooperative fashion, and it has both a quite, reliable stability, but also a quite reliable evolution. And what's interesting is I've recently, with the work of Konstantinos Zenios, created something like this for one of my courses. And what we did there in one of the courses at the university is got former students to basically create a wiki of some of the main ideas, main themes, main arguments in the course. And what happens is people, of course, get much more involved in a participatory fashion with the generation of sort of the credo for the course. And what they also do is, is they create something like the Wikipedia that gives people much more interactional and evolving content to work with. So you get sort of this presentation of what's paradigmatic and prototypical for the course, but in this collective, dynamic, and ongoing fashion. So perhaps we could think about creating a credo analogous to that, where we create something like a wiki, a credo wiki, for example, by which groups of people that are interested in creating ecologies of practices and psychotechnologies can communicate with each other for how to adaptively set the criterion and how to constantly re-engineer the creation of the meta psychotechnology that will help to guarantee, maybe that's too strong a word, help to promote, reliably promote both the bottom-up and top-down functionality of this ecology of psychotechnology. Maybe that could be set in conjunction with a co-op structure of these various communities where they are co-opting together to create a shared curriculum, a shared credo in this wiki manner, and which they are also trying to afford a kind of synoptic integration, a shared vocabulary, not imposed as an ideology, but to allow for transformative and bridging insights and discourse between the various groups, so that they might be able to afford each other's development and enhancement. Now, as I've said, all of that is not, I am not presenting a utopic vision. Um, that's not what's going on. What's going on is people are already doing this. They are already trying to create these ecologies of practices. They're trying to create ways of talking to each other, setting the criterion, and they're making use of social media, they're making use of the internet, they're making use of cooperative, dynamic forms of social organization. I think all of those could be appropriated in a way to help bring about this religion that's not a religion. And what I've tried to do is offer some suggestions on things to keep in mind, and at least some potential methods for helping to bring this about. Whether or not this functions, whether or not any of this takes root, again, it's not even up to me. I'm not some sort of linchpin or pivotal figure. I'm just trying, this sounds so insufficient. I'm just trying to help. I'm really just trying to help, and I want to give people some way of how to go about starting to make this work more and more powerfully and perspicaciously. All right, so I have tried to show how in 3 interrelated ways we can respond to the meaning crisis. I've tried to show that there are sets of practices that we can cultivate as an ecology for addressing the perennial problems. We can set those perennial problems into a legitimating worldview via the theoretical scientific machinery given to us by third generation cognitive science, 4E cognitive science. And that all of that can be set practically within the project of trying to bring about the religion that is not a religion, in terms of, like I said, some suggestions about some structural features of what we're looking for and some organizational features of how to try and initiate that and get that going. This is ultimately going to come back to the dialogue that I'm going to set up between what I've argued for here and some of the other prophets of this religion beyond a religion that's not a religion, like Tillich, Jung, I would argue, also Corbin, and perhaps aspects of Barfield. And the godfather of all of that, of course, are people like Heidegger. So that's going to be something we're going to come back to. But we need to do something else now that I've constantly been putting aside, because it also is going to be involved in the process that I have been proposing to you, and we've said it throughout, which is the cultivation of wisdom. And as we've seen, the cultivation of wisdom as a meta virtue is deeply resonant with, right, the communitas cultivation of the meta psychology that is needed for the ecology of psychotechnology. And of course, wisdom is also needed for the project of enlightenment, as I've already mentioned. And finally, wisdom has always been associated since the Axial Revolution with satisfying those deep connectedness, the connectedness to oneself, the connectedness to the world, the connectedness to others, that makes for a meaningful life. So I want to start talking now about the cognitive science of wisdom. And I want to, and again, this is a very exciting and hot area in cognitive science. There's lots going on about this right now, and it's becoming very, very pervasive. And the discussion of wisdom in the culture at large is coming to the fore again. So I would like to have a series at some point that's just on wisdom. I can't do that right now. What I want to do is try and give, again, sort of a very quick overview of sort of the key players, if you'll allow it, serious players, in the cognitive science of wisdom business, and what we can glean from that and how we can integrate it into the model and picture we've been building here. So this really took off in the 1990s with an anthology by Robert Sternberg. The psychologist Robert Sternberg has done a tremendous amount of work to bring back the notion of wisdom within psychology, within cognitive science in general, and even within pedagogy and the understanding of education. And that anthology really started to bring out some of the initial work that was being done, the seminal work, and also promote a lot of work that has expanded since on this. I want to talk about work that was happening at around the same time as this, shortly thereafter. So the Sternberg, the first Sternberg anthology on wisdom, there's been another one since, the Wisdom Handbook, was in 1990. And then what I consider a really important article came out in 1999 by McGee and Barber. It was important because it was basically retrospective reflection on sort of the first decade of work on wisdom, but it was doing something more than that. So it was definitely doing that retrospective, but it was also doing something very important. Something that is so resonant with what we've been doing here together. Because what they wanted to do was they wanted to try and link two things together in a very powerful convergence argument. They wanted to look at all of what they called the a priori theories of wisdom. Our way of understanding that, I think, is very easy just by seeing what they looked at. They wanted to look at all the philosophical theories, and we've looked at quite a few of them. So we have an understanding of what they're talking about. We saw the Socratic theory and the Aristotelian and the Stoic, right, and the Platonic. So you have the philosophical theories of wisdom, and of course that's appropriate because philosophy is the love of wisdom. But they also wanted to look at, right, and there had been about 15 years, because the anthology comes out in 1990, some work had been going on in the 80s, and then it starts to really take off. But you've got the psychological theories. Right? Now these are very conceptually driven. They're very sort of top-down. These, of course, are much more empirically driven, bottom-up. And what they were trying to do was they're trying to set up basically a reflective equilibrium between them. They're trying to find through a coordinated investigation a convergent theme, both from all of the philosophical work and all of the psychological work. So looking at all of the philosophical work, what does it converge on? Same thing with the psychological work, and then can we draw it all together in a reflectively coherent fashion? And they did. They make a very powerful argument. They go through and they make an argument that what all of these theories converge on is seeing through illusion. That the core of wisdom is the ability to see through illusion. Where this means, of course, much more broadly. They're not meaning primarily here visual illusion. They're meaning, right, cognitive and existential illusion that is caused by self-deception. So seeing through this. And of course, because wisdom is a systematic notion, and this is something they are going to explicitly argue about, this is systematically, right? So not just this illusion or this self-deception, but a systematic seeing through of self-deception. And then in something that Leo and I Leo Ferraro and I published in 2013, we argued that this, of course, has a strong implication that should be filled out here, seeing through illusion and into, right, some sense of what's reality, or at least what's more real. And because you can only know if you're seeing through illusion if you come to something that you regard as being less illusory in nature. So this is directly the systematic, right? Seeing through illusion and into reality. Now, notice what this is. This is a very profound, meaning both deep, and pervasive, meaning across many different instances of where you're trying to solve your problems, achieving your goal. This is a very profound kind of insight. It's a systematic insight that we talked about when we talked about higher states of consciousness. And we'll see that McGee and Barber are using exactly this idea. It's to find across many areas in which you have been misframing problems, to see them, to realize them as systematically, right, related, such that you can come up with an insight that intervenes not just on this problem, but in all of these problems in a systematic fashion, and thereby you start to see systematically through illusion and into what is more real. So this is a key idea as to what you're trying to cultivate when you cultivate wisdom. And what we're going to do next time is we're going to continue to look at, we're going to follow this about putting the psychological theories and the philosophical theories into dialogue, and to, right, continue developing what is it that we're talking about when we're talking about wisdom, and relatedly, what is it we're doing when we're proposing the cultivation of wisdom. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Meow, 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 meow. Rough, rough, rough. Rough, rough, rough. Rough, 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 rough. All right, fam. Another episode is behind us. We've only got 10 left. We can start the countdown now.
Oh, man.
We're going to be up to episode 40 next week. This is awesome. And man, was he talking fast in this episode. So much to
three
consider.
levels of mythos is where we left off.
Yes, here we are.
So there's the unconscious level, which relevance realization takes place, and it's a participatory knowing. Now, like what he's saying, you can become aware of your participation, but that's...
Yes, this is where the connections are being made unconsciously. Mm-hmm. So most of our relevance realization takes place unconscious.
We pick up on what is it? I think yellow out of the corner of our eyes best. You don't realize it, but you're drawn over. Like that moment before.
Yeah.
And then there's the conscious level, which is your salience landscaping.
Yes, which is standing out of what is salient to us or important to us.
Now I see the yellow. Why is that yellow? Oh, that yellow is fruit. I am hungry.
This is our perspectival knowing, whereas the unconscious level is the grounding of our participatory knowing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it's also the consciousness level is also our procedural knowing.
Yes.
And our skill cultivation.
Yep.
And where our connections are made.
Yes, the participatory builds to our procedural knowing, and this allows us for coping and caring conscious actions. So basically the unconscious level connections are being made, the conscious level connections are being sensed, and skillful action and apt sensibility is being evolved. And then we get the cultural level.
which is our distributed cognition, our
Yes.
communication, our sharing of the connections we have realized.
Yes. So this is where the connections are shared. So connections are being made unconsciously, connections are being sensed consciously, and now on the cultural level, distributive cognition is the process in which our connections are being shared. So this is our myths.
Yeah,
This is
so-
also science,
And
so on.
our machinery of mythos also goes not just into our distributed cognition, but then also into our procedural and our perspectival and our participatory knowing. So it all feeds back
Yep.
down
Back
and
and
up at the
forth.
same time, or
Yes.
back and forth if you don't like the down and the up. And the mythos is a propositional knowing that touches on all these other forms of knowing as well.
Yes.
So credo in service of religio.
Mythos. We need a mythos that is explicitly connected to the perspectival, the propositional, the procedural, and the participatory.
Yeah.
Are various types of knowing that should be in service of religio, of the religious experience. So once we have this framework in mind, it should help us to cultivate an ecology of psychotechnologies that is both top down
Yeah,
and
yeah.
bottom up.
Yeah, yeah.
Open to more, and so we to get that
And the top
bottom up emergence of understanding.
and the top down must allow and facilitate the bottom up
Yes.
as well.
Yes, it can't be absolutist. Yes. So we need sets of practices. That's what he means by an ecology of practices. We need various types of practices and cognitive styles, like orientation, that have checks and balances that help us develop that counteractive dynamical system that helps us complexify our understanding in an optimal manner.
Yeah. So
So we need a meta psychotech.
yeah, that moves us out of the intuitive psychotech into the explicit cultivation of psychotech.
That's right. To be
Yeah.
able to engineer these psychotechnologies that aid us in that further cultivation, as DJ was saying, of not just individual psychotechnologies, but the
Yeah.
whole total psychology as well.
And then there's
Psychotechnology, sorry.
Yeah, and then there's meta virtue, which is individual wisdom, all the way up to the community level cultivation of the ecology of psychotechnology. So individually, you're using wisdom, cultivating virtue, but then we're building up now as a community that are, by ecology of psychotechnology, many different types of
Yes.
psychotechnology that are trying to tackle the same problem.
Yes, this is how
And
we can
allows
optimize.
this up-down relationship.
And we're doing this because we want to optimize for the perennial, for these recurrent historical problems that we keep running into as a species in a way that is cognizant with worldview attunement for the individual and the collective. So wisdom is a meta virtue. And so we do want that coordination of the various virtues together, pursuing an ongoing cultivation of our individual psychotechnologies, plus the further cultivation of the meta virtues and the meta psychotechnology. So
Yeah.
Vervaeke proposes, because this is such ground level stuff, we're literally just putting the holes in the ground and dropping the seeds. We need to create something perhaps like a credopedia or a wiki or credo
Yeah.
wiki,
Basically the combination of cyber technology and psychotechnology. So yeah, like Wikipedia, if you're in the know, you know that Wikipedia as a site has its problems, but the idea of a wiki, I
general,
play
yeah.
Minecraft. I can't survive on Minecraft without the Minecraft wiki. I'm
Wikis are
sorry.
super
It's a group
useful.
of people within the
Yeah.
Minecraft community that put up information.
distributive cognition.
Yes, ever evolving, and well, it's collective and ever evolving.
Yes. So we need various communities to
and
be
stable,
able.
and
yes,
user based, and stable.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So various communities sharing in Credo for synoptic integration to bridge insights and afford each other's development and enhancement. Can you imagine if different spiritual communities, particularly the serious ones, like the religious ones, were actually doing this together more? It would be amazing. Every once in a while you see it happen. And it's a really exciting thing to see when the Buddhists and the Christians come together in common cause.
Or even within, say, a singular church in Christianity, it's like Bible study 2.0.
Yes.
You know, you have whatever United Methodist Church Bible study wiki page where, instead of just sitting there for the Bible, no, it's like people are cross-referencing stuff, putting more information, allowing
Giving you more context.
insight and discourse and a shared
And a
vocabulary,
shared, yes, yes.
which is important because it's like a lot of the times when trying to talk about things, particularly like, I would consider this, a higher level university lecture stuff. And there's a lot of lingo in here that if you're not in on the lingo, you're going to have a real hard time telling what we're talking about. But this kind of wiki system will allow you to be like, oh, what's that word? Bam. Somebody's already put it up in there, different references of where it has come up in different literature,
Yes.
where it's come from,
Yes, yeah. Brendan Graham Dempsey, who I know online, but I haven't actually gotten to talk to yet, I noticed had started a wiki for the Awakening series in some fashion, and I'm not sure if that is now defunct or if it's on pause or what's going on. But the point that Vervaeke also raises here, which I think is very important, and I did not see Brendan doing this at all. I think he was doing a good job at what he'd started. We want to be very careful of developing utopic visions. We really have to be cognizant of that curb that we run into in the past. We need something that is cooperative, that is dynamic, and that allowing the insights of various cultural traditions to form together in a dynamic, cooperative social organization.
So in responding to the meaning crisis, he laid out a few things we're going to need. We're going to need a set of practices to create an ecology to deal with these perennial problems.
Yes, yes.
We're going to need to look into how 4E's cognitive psychology can inform, and not just, inform as in like to know something, but inform our understanding of the meaning crisis.
Right on.
To set into the...
Trying to decipher your hieroglyphs.
Yeah, hieroglyphs. Give me half a second. Set into this. Set into the project of bringing about the religion that is not religion.
Yes.
So really start getting into that, and the cultivation of wisdom, which is needed for insight, and it is and this is wisdom is needed for insight and is associated with satisfying deep connectedness.
Yes, so this is resonant with our need for communitas.
Yes.
And we also need a project of enlightenment for the human race. And this is actually what like Buddhism calls for. And I love that Christianity, Jesus was trying to help us about as well. We need a project for enlightening as many living beings as we possibly can, satisfying that deep sense of connectedness with the world and the self for greater meaning in life. So now we looked at the main players in the cognitive science of wisdom.
So Robert Sternberg, he didn't really get too far into him, but he's a psychologist that wrote on the pedagogy, which is the teaching of the teaching of the teachers, basically. Well, the teaching of, but the teaching of the teachers, really, getting people,
on the same page, basically.
on the same page, so then they can teach it out, and
So catching everybody up on the last 10 years of the cognitive science of wisdom, understanding how wisdom is working in our bodies and brains.
And then there's Ian and Barber, so 1999,
Brought us the convergence argument, right?
I did get that part, but maybe
He's looking at the a priori understanding of wisdom.
Yes.
So he gave us two distinctive ways, or how cognitive science has studied, because cognitive science covers philosophy, neuroscience, psychology, so on, like 4 or 5 different fields. They're all connected to understanding the brain and consciousness in general. So there's philosophical theories, and then there's the psychological theories.
Yeah, and the philosophical is the top down, and the psychological is from the bottom up.
Yeah.
So like,
And we're trying to create convergence.
Yes.
We're looking for a convergence argument. So where do these things converge? What is the theme?
yeah, what's the theme between the two, where they converge? And so the core of wisdom is systematically seeing through illusion, self-deception, and into a sense of what is more real,
Yes.
a profound insight.
Right? Yeah, yeah. Something that is profound, so deep, but also pervasive, so deep and covers a wide amount of considerations.
And this reflecting between the two will help us
Realize
find
insights
yeah
that intervene on the whole sets of problems in a
yeah
systematic
the many
fashion.
the many areas of misframing that we have that
Yes,
allows us to
yes.
see through our illusions into what's more real, because we have a lot of framings and we have a lot of misframings,
Misframings,
and
yeah.
we have grand misframings around good framings and grand framings around misframings, and then we're trying to be
Misframings
able to
around
look
framings,
across
yeah.
them and figure out what's what,
Right, yeah.
basically find the baby in
So
the
we really want to
bathwater.
highlight what's working and what hasn't worked in the past
Yeah.
so that we can navigate with as much wisdom as we can cultivate together.
Yeah,
That's
pretty
it,
much.
man. So it was a lot in this episode, but it's further clarifying and helping complexify my own understanding, not in a complicated way, but in a way that is able to afford a lot of different considerations at
Yeah.
once. He's just given us so much. I feel gifted by Vervaeke here.
And it's for
Thank
free
you,
too.
brother.
I didn't have to go into severe college debt to get this lecture series,
Right, and I think most adults, even high schoolers, could hang with this. It's just
yeah.
that it's 50 lectures. But he builds it up in a way that you're getting every single term and a very comprehensive understanding
And
of what he's talking about.
it's
He
not
repeats
plotting.
his points
It
a lot of
doesn't.
different
It
ways.
doesn't. Even
No,
with the
yeah.
repeating, it doesn't seem like he's plotting. It's like when he
No.
does his repeating, it's so. If one way didn't quite get it in your head, there's another way he gets it from in another way, and
Yeah.
then he moves on.
Many
and then
times, yeah.
In the future, he comes back to it and does the.
And this
same
whole
kind of
series
thing
starts
to
out
it.
as like an adventure. It's like a journey into
Yeah,
our
right.
deep past, but it's also at the same time talking about why are we so fascinated with zombies nowadays?
Yeah,
And it's like literally bridging the gaps and helping us understand how we got here and where we actually are so that we're not in that sense of absurdity anymore. And we're able to solve for that inner sense of anxiety with the way the world is and what's going on inside of our own minds. And as we try and fit our agent to the arena, this constantly changing, very quickly moving arena that we find ourselves in.
and ever increasing in velocity as well. So
No doubt.
it's creating quite the gravity, if you will, because if you increase your velocity, you get synthetic gravity.
Yeah. He is grounding us in an appreciation of wisdom and an appreciation of communitas and an appreciation of the orientation of those greats that came before us, such as Jesus Christ and Buddha and others who have inspired other cultures around the world.
And then all the nameless forefathers and mothers before we started writing stuff down.
Yes,
Or
long before
we
Socrates
started
came
writing
along.
stuff down in a way that would last long enough for us to go, oh, look, they were writing.
The stories that begin as stories that we told that are now written down, but we told them for eons before we
Well,
ever
even when we had literacy, like the Brothers Grimm, those stories were just a collection of folk stories that were just spoken.
Yeah. When did the printing press come about?
Oh, God.
It wasn't that long ago. 500 years ago or so. And then the Bible was the first
Why was it
book.
Gutenberg? Was that the first printing press? Was Gutenberg, and then the Gutenberg Bible was like the.
Yes,
the
I think
Bible
you're
is
right.
the most
Good memory.
the most printed book on the planet.
I believe it.
Yeah,
It's
crazy.
closely followed by Harry Potter.
Some would venture that both are work of fiction and fantasy, but I think if you only look at good literature that way, then you're missing a lot of the.
Well, all great stories teach a
Things-
deeper underlying truth than can be said in words alone. So you've got to use a story as a vehicle, just like we've talked about on this series, Game of Thrones and Walking Dead. They're telling us a deeper story about how humans can get along, even when they typically are people that wouldn't get along. They can find a way to unite in common cause against a greater threat, and we find that the greater threat is our own capacity for self-deception.
Yep.
Our own danger to ourselves and one another when we are not in states of communitas and understanding. So the printing press, woodblock printing in China dates back to the 9th century, but the Gutenberg, let me see here. I'm going to find out. Is that right? 1430? 1436?
1436. Okay.
Yeah, there it is.
Actually, it's been
was-
it's been around for half a
Yeah, in the West, but in the East, it was really the 9th century. In the West, it was in the 15th century,
yeah,
so
but
1436.
but the printing press took woodblock printing and made it much faster.
It did, but
Because
actually the Gutenberg was far from the first to automate book printing. It was still, but it was still fast, a
yeah,
lot
yeah,
faster. But you had to put all the pieces down. You weren't automating it yet.
yeah, and well, still, even that type like newspaper print, you still have to do. Well, I guess nowadays you can do it digitally, but for the longest time, you still would have to lay out each character. But you're able to print many, 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 many copies reliably within a standardized format. But we've been figuring things out for a while, and let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and be too down on humans because we're just walking, talking apes
Yeah, because what we're
with
finding now is
guns.
that there's always babies in the bathwater that we keep trying
Yeah,
to throw
yeah,
away.
exactly.
There's
Yeah.
always very important babies. There are kernels of insights, and there's reasons that people came up with these strange, dreamlike myths to try and teach the cultures of those times and future cultures how to deal with perennial problems and the historic challenges of our times. So here we are, guys. We are awakening from the meaning crisis together. Never woke, always awakening. We're open ended here. There's no cap to our enlightenment and our potential for improvement, which is actually an exciting story to me. You're never going to get to the end, there's always room to grow.
Yep.
We love you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Actuali. We're going to be back next Wednesday, 8 p.e.s.t., as long as our schedules permit. And we are so excited to have you guys here on the journey with us. Make sure you throw some likes and subscribes. Throw your questions or comments down there on the videos here, whether you be on Twitch or Facebook or YouTube here with us. And check out Actuali on Spotify or iTunes or Stitcher or whatever podcast platform you like to use. Help us get some higher ratings and reach more people with this work. And that's all I got to say tonight, man.
Yep. That's.
Good for you too. All right. Love you guys. We are out. I've been Chris.
I've been DJ.
We'll see you guys next time.
Meow.